Eleanor Whitford's ascent into Newport's gilded social circle was the kind of transformation that seemed pulled from the pages of a serialized novel, the sort that both fascinated and unsettled those who watched it happen. Born to a modest family in Providence, she had neither the lineage nor the fortune that usually served as the price of admission into the opulent summer playground of America's elite. Yet, by the time she was in her early 20s, Eleanor had become the name on every guest list worth attending, a fixture in the marble ballrooms and sprawling verandas of Bellevue Avenue's grand mansions. Her beauty was undeniable: dark hair swept into elegant chignons, eyes that held the sort of quiet challenge that could unsettle even the most self-assured men. But beauty alone was not enough in Newport's ruthless hierarchy. What set her apart was the ease with which she could mirror anyone's mood, draw out confidences without appearing to pry, and make even the most indifferent stranger feel as though they had her undivided attention. Those who encountered her often spoke of a strange magnetism, a subtle pull that lingered long after the evening was over. Her introduction into high society came through an unexpected channel, an invitation to a charity gala hosted by the Whitfields, a family whose fortune had been made in shipping. Rumor had it that Eleanor had met their youngest son, James, on a train ride to Boston, where she had skillfully turned a casual conversation into a lasting connection. Whether through genuine charm or calculated maneuvering, she became a regular guest in their home, and from there her network began to grow with remarkable speed. At first, she played the role of the curious newcomer, wide-eyed and graciously grateful for every introduction, but it wasn't long before she began to influence the guest lists herself, whispering suggestions about who might liven an evening or which rival families might be better kept apart. She had an uncanny ability to position herself at the center of social currents without ever appearing to be the one directing them. Within a year, Eleanor's name was synonymous with elegance. She had an instinct for fashion that kept her always a step ahead of the Paris trends filtering through the wardrobes of Newport's most fashionable women. She favored gowns of soft silks and unusual color combinations, choosing shades that made others take note and, more often than not, imitate her choices the following season. Yet her influence extended far beyond her clothing. She seemed to know the precise moment to offer a compliment, when to join a conversation and when to hold back, how to tell a story so that it drew everyone closer without revealing too much about herself. It was this art of selective disclosure that made her both captivating and elusive, a figure that people felt they knew intimately but could never fully understand. Behind the scenes, however, Eleanor was far from the passive ornament she appeared to be in public. She kept meticulous track of the shifting alliances and rivalries within Newport's social order, understanding that a misplaced word or ill-timed introduction could have consequences that rippled for months. Letters found much later suggested that she kept a kind of ledger, part diary, part social map, where she recorded not only the events she attended, but the subtle gestures, overheard remarks, and private grievances of those around her. Whether she intended to use this information as leverage or simply enjoyed the power of knowing more than anyone else remains a subject of speculation, but it was clear that her charm was never entirely without calculation. Her skill at navigating these treacherous waters earned her a reputation as a woman of influence, though never in an overtly political sense. She was not known for championing causes or speaking publicly. Instead, her influence was wielded in the quiet realm of introductions, dinner seating arrangements, and whispered advice to the right ear at the right time. She could smooth over a disagreement with a carefully chosen anecdote or fan the flames of a rivalry simply by recalling a remark made months before. This talent for subtle manipulation made her invaluable to some and dangerous to others, though few would have admitted as much in public. Financially, Eleanor's position was more precarious than anyone suspected at the time. She had a modest inheritance from her late father, but it was hardly enough to sustain the lifestyle she now led. The truth, hidden beneath layers of carefully maintained appearances, was that she relied heavily on the generosity of her admirers, both male and female. Gifts of jewelry, invitations to extended stays in summer homes, and discreet loans allowed her to maintain her position without ever appearing to be in need. This quiet dependence on the goodwill of others was a dangerous game, but one she played with remarkable finesse. She never accepted anything without giving something intangible in return: an evening of captivating conversation, a shared secret, or the sense that the giver had become part of her inner circle. In many ways, Eleanor's greatest achievement was creating a persona so complete that it became impossible to separate the woman from the image. To the casual observer, she was simply one of Newport's leading beauties, a young woman blessed with both charm and good fortune. To those who knew her better, she was a strategist, someone who understood that the true currency of high society was not money alone but the perception of influence and desirability. She moved through the season like a queen without a crown, her approval sought by those who had once dismissed her as an outsider, her presence requested at gatherings weeks in advance, and yet, beneath the glittering facade, there was always an undercurrent of tension, as if she were balancing on a wire stretched high above the ballroom floor, fully aware that one misstep could send her tumbling from the heights she had so carefully climbed. The summer of 1889 began with the usual parade of carriages along Bellevue Avenue, the arrival of trunks from New York and Boston, and the opening of the grandest houses for a season of parties, regattas, and quiet rivalries disguised as cordial conversation. For Eleanor Whitford, it was meant to be her most triumphant summer yet, a culmination of years spent weaving herself into the fabric of Newport's elite. Her engagement to Charles Redmond, heir to a considerable shipping fortune, had been announced in the spring, a match that seemed to secure her place among the city's most enviable women. Yet beneath the surface of this carefully arranged happiness, shadows had begun to gather. The first whispers emerged at a garden luncheon in June, when a letter, slipped into the wrong envelope, was said to have revealed that Charles's family fortune might not be as stable as it appeared. The rumors were vague at first, quickly dismissed by those unwilling to believe that one of Newport's most prominent families could falter, but they were enough to plant doubt in the minds of those who measured their alliances in terms of wealth and security. It was in the midst of these murmurs that a more dangerous rumor began to circulate, one that placed Eleanor at its center. A visiting cousin from Providence, perhaps too free with her tongue after a glass of champagne, hinted that Eleanor's inheritance, long thought to have come from her late father's investments, was not entirely legitimate. The story grew in the telling, until it was being whispered that certain documents had been forged, wills altered, signatures imitated to ensure that Eleanor received a sum that might otherwise have gone to more distant relatives. There was no proof, only suggestion, yet in a world where appearances were everything, suggestion could be as ruinous as fact. Some dismissed the talk as envy, the inevitable backlash against a woman who had risen too quickly. Others began to reassess their invitations and reconsider the wisdom of aligning themselves too closely with her. The tension reached a turning point in July, during the Redmonds' Midsummer Ball, an event that brought together nearly every influential family in Newport. Eleanor arrived in a gown of pale green silk embroidered with silver thread, a deliberate choice that set her apart from the sea of white and cream favored by other young women that season. She danced, smiled, and moved through the crowd with her usual poise, yet more than one observer noticed the way certain conversations seemed to falter when she approached, or how glances were exchanged in her wake. Late in the evening, Charles was called away from the dance floor by his elder brother, and the two were seen speaking in low, urgent tones near the terrace. Shortly afterward, Charles disappeared from the ballroom entirely, and though Eleanor remained until the early hours, her fiancé did not return. The next day, Newport awoke to the news that Charles had left for New York on business, his departure abrupt enough to fuel speculation. Some claimed he had gone to address the rumored troubles in his family's finances, others insisted that he had confronted Eleanor about the whispers regarding her inheritance. That week, the engagement was quietly called into question, though no formal announcement was made. The uncertainty was enough to embolden those who had kept their doubts to themselves, and before long the gossip had taken on a sharper edge. Old acquaintances from Providence were said to be telling stories of Eleanor's early life that painted her as ambitious to the point of cold calculation, willing to use any means to secure her advancement. Newport's drawing rooms, always hungry for novelty, found in these tales the perfect mix of scandal and intrigue. The social calendar that had once revolved around Eleanor began to shift. Invitations that had been certain only weeks before were suddenly delayed or lost, and the hosts who did welcome her often did so with a watchful reserve, as though measuring her words for signs of guilt or desperation. Eleanor responded with a calm defiance, attending every event to which she was invited, her head held high, her charm undimmed. Yet even her most dazzling smiles could not fully dispel the sense that she was under siege. The absence of Charles only deepened the mystery, and when he failed to return by August, the whispers took on a darker tone. Some suggested he had fled an impending scandal, others claimed that he had uncovered something so troubling about Eleanor that he could not bear to face her again. It was during this uneasy lull that another incident added fuel to the fire. At a small gathering hosted by the Whitfields, a guest from New York produced a letter he claimed had been found in a discarded stack of papers from a law office. The letter, though unsigned, appeared to be addressed to Eleanor, and its contents hinted at an arrangement between her and an unidentified party concerning the distribution of an estate. The authenticity of the letter was never verified, but the damage was done. Within days, it had been retold in so many variations that no one could recall the original phrasing, only that it seemed to confirm the most damning of the rumors. By the middle of August, her once formidable network of allies had dwindled to a handful of steadfast friends, and even they urged her to leave Newport for a time, to let the scandal fade before returning. Eleanor, however, refused to retreat. She continued to make appearances, sometimes in the company of admirers who seemed as interested in her notoriety as in her beauty. She smiled for the photographers who lingered outside the grand hotels, offering them images that would appear in the society pages alongside speculation about her future. But for all her outward confidence, there were moments caught in the reflection of a shop window, glimpsed in the pause before she answered a probing question when her composure seemed to crack, revealing something raw or beneath. The uncertainty surrounding her engagement, the relentless scrutiny, and the growing sense of isolation began to press in on her. As summer waned, the final blow came in the form of a rumor so severe that even those inclined to defend her found themselves silent. It was said that Charles Redmond had not merely left for New York but had broken the engagement in writing, citing matters of trust that could not be resolved. Whether this was true or another invention of Newport's tireless gossips, no one could say with certainty, for the letter was never produced. But the phrase lingered in conversations and column inches alike, a haunting echo that cast a shadow over every mention of her name. On an overcast September morning, when the summer visitors were beginning to depart and Newport's grand avenues were growing quieter, Eleanor Whitford vanished. The news traveled first through whispers in drawing rooms and along the narrow servants' corridors of the great houses, then into the streets, where it became the subject of hushed exchanges between shopkeepers and carriage drivers. She had last been seen 2 evenings prior, walking along the cliffside path near Ochre Point just before sunset, dressed in a dove-gray gown and carrying a small parasol. Several witnesses claimed she was not alone. A man in a dark coat was said to have been walking a short distance ahead of her, though whether they spoke or even acknowledged one another was uncertain. By morning, she was gone, leaving behind her rooms at the boarding house she had taken for the season in perfect order, her gowns neatly arranged, her personal papers untouched. The initial assumption was that she had gone to New York or Boston, perhaps to escape the mounting scandal or to seek the comfort of friends far from Newport's prying eyes. But as days passed without a letter, telegram, or sighting, the tone of speculation began to change. Some whispered that she had left under cover of darkness to join a benefactor overseas, a wealthy admirer who could offer her both refuge and protection from the gossip that had nearly consumed her. Others suggested something more sinister, that she had met with foul play, lured to the cliffs by someone she trusted only to be silenced before she could reveal whatever truths she carried. The sea, with its dark, restless waters, was invoked in more than one conversation, and some claimed to have seen a parasol matching hers tangled in the rocks below the point, though no such item was ever recovered. The local authorities, unaccustomed to dealing with matters that so closely intertwined the city's social elite with potential scandal, conducted their inquiries with a mix of discretion and inefficiency. They interviewed the staff at her boarding house, who reported nothing unusual beyond her seeming more withdrawn in the days before her disappearance. The chambermaid recalled that Eleanor had received a letter the morning she was last seen, a letter she read twice before tucking it into her reticule. No one could say what became of it, as it was not found among her possessions. The postmark, according to the maid's recollection, was smudged but bore the outline of a city seal that might have been New York's. This detail was enough to send an investigator there, but no trace of her was discovered in any of the hotels or boarding houses. Meanwhile, Newport's social set was quick to reshape the narrative to suit their own biases. Those who had never trusted her declared that she had fled in disgrace, unable to bear the weight of exposure. They spoke with a certain satisfaction, as if her disappearance confirmed everything they had suspected about her ambition and deceit. Others, more charitable or perhaps more romantically inclined, painted her as a tragic figure, driven to desperate measures by the cruelty of those who once courted her favor. In their telling, she had been the victim of a great betrayal, her vanishing a final act of self-preservation. There were even a few who claimed to have received word from her directly, letters that arrived without a return address and in a handwriting so similar to hers that they could not be sure it was not forged. The absence of definitive answers only deepened the fascination. Newspapers in Boston and New York began to pick up the story, framing it as the mystery of the season. They printed illustrations of her face based on photographs taken at society events, alongside romanticized accounts of her life and disappearance. Some embellished the facts, inventing clandestine affairs, coded messages, and secret meetings with diplomats, all without evidence. These stories only served to blur the line between truth and fiction, until even those who had known her best began to question which memories were genuine and which had been colored by rumor. By October, as the last of the summer residents closed their houses and left Newport to the locals, the official search for Eleanor had largely been abandoned. The authorities, facing the embarrassment of their failure to locate her, quietly filed the matter as unresolved. Yet the story refused to fade. Servants continued to exchange theories long after their employers had moved on to winter residences, and shopkeepers swore they saw her face in passing strangers. In the evenings, as the wind rose and the waves crashed against the cliffs, some claimed they could hear footsteps on the cliffside path, followed by the faint rustle of skirts, though no one was there when they turned to look. There were occasional developments, none of them conclusive. A small trunk was discovered months later in a warehouse in Providence, bearing a shipping label with her name but containing only a few personal items, a pair of gloves, a worn copy of a French novel, and a silver brooch shaped like a swallow. The handwriting on the label matched hers, yet no one could determine when it had been sent or from where. Years later, a woman living in Paris under the name Madame Eleanor was rumored to resemble her, though no photograph was ever produced, and the few who traveled to verify the claim returned uncertain, unable to say with conviction whether it was truly her or simply a coincidence. As time passed, Eleanor's disappearance took on the qualities of legend, a story told to newcomers as both a cautionary tale and a romantic mystery. For some, she became a symbol of the peril faced by women who dared to play the game of high society without the protection of unassailable wealth or family name. For others, she was a specter of independence, a woman who, faced with ruin, chose to vanish rather than be destroyed publicly. In either case, she lingered in Newport's collective memory, her absence as carefully constructed as her presence had once been. Those who had known her personally could never quite agree on who she truly was. To some, she was a skilled manipulator who had orchestrated her own escape with precision, disappearing into a new life of her choosing. To others, she was a victim of circumstances beyond her control, undone by forces she could not fight. The truth, as with so much about Eleanor Whitford, remained elusive, buried somewhere between the gossip, the half-truths, and the silence she left behind.